Seeing the crowds, Jesus went up on a mountain. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Today, Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. And that is a general statement which means both men and women, sons of God being interchanged for children of God. So ladies, don't feel slighted when we say sons of God, because it means every human being who is in a right relationship with God, who's attempts to be a peacemaker, shall be called one of the sons of God. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people aren't happy unless they are fussing and fighting, though. Fussing, fighting, feuding, whatever you want to call it. James chapter 4 recognizes that since the church is made up of human beings, that there are going to be times when human beings become contentious, create strife, chaos, and confusion, even within the church. So in this Beatitude, Jesus actually excludes vicious and vindictive people from the family of God. But that's not so what is not so obvious here is the fact that Jesus calls his disciples to be peacemakers. He calls us to be peacemakers. Now there's a big difference between a peacemaker and a peacekeeper, or peacemakers and peacekeepers. Just think of the United Nations and the peacekeepers that they send throughout the world to keep peace in various places, and they're never successful, are they? Because what do they go there to do? They go there to watch, and they report the instances of people breaking the peace. Okay? They don't do anything to make peace. They're just there to kind of watch and report. So there's a difference, but the big difference between peacemakers and peacekeepers is compromise. Now you think about it. A peacemaker will compromise anything, including principle, to avoid strife. A peacekeeper, okay, just give up everything. I don't want to cause any problems. I don't want any strife. I will say anything. I won't do anything. I just go along with whatever. So think about these things. Two people agreeing not to shoot one another is not peace. That's a truce. But that's not peace. A truce is not peace. Has there been peace on the Korean Peninsula since the 1950s? No. They've got a truce, right? But still a state of war exists, right? Two people agreeing not to bring up the past is not peace. That's avoiding responsibility. Because I'll get the problem dealt with and get on with life, right? Two people agreeing to disagree is not peace. That again is compromise, which is planned failure. Is that what compromise is? We plan to fail? We can't work it out, so we just plan to not going to have anything really work. People sitting around hoping things will get better is not peacemaking. When did anything ever get better? By not doing something to improve it. My wife found out about that. Her cold didn't get any better, so it turned into bronchitis and sinusitis. And that's why she's not here with us today. But hopefully she'll be here tonight. Get a little more rest. It's like the check engine light on your car, Charlie. Right? When the check engine light comes on, what do? Well, you cover it up with a piece of tape, right?
Amen.
Problem solved.
Yeah.
Don't have to do anything. Yeah, until chugga boom boom, and then you're stuck alongside the road somewhere. So putting a piece of duct tape over the light will not solve the problem. Same thing happens with church matters. moral matters, ethical matters. Look at Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 11. They have healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. You know what happened to those people? They said peace, peace, when there wasn't any peace. There wasn't peace with God, that's the main thing, and there wasn't peace with the nations around them because they were so weak they had to depend upon other nations that hated them as much as the ones that were going to attack them hated them, and ended up they destroyed their whole nation because they said, oh, we're at peace, it's peace. But there really wasn't any peace. It was all compromise. It was a false peace that they had entered into. So a peacemaker actively overcomes evil with good. And listen, hey, don't misunderstand it. What were those big Colt 45s, wasn't it, back in the Old West that they were called the Peacemaker? Why? Because they were something to be feared, right? The sheriff, the one who was in charge of keeping peace in a region, he had to wear a gun because there were some people who just would not listen and did not want peace. He was charged with making peace, keeping the peace, yeah, but making peace to see that there was peace around, and that was just one of the ways that he had to do it. Peacemakers know true peace comes by changing minds and altering behaviors, right? Keep that in mind. Peacemakers live according to and teach God's plan of abundant living. We talked about abundant living not too long ago on a Sunday night. They use their influence to prevent strife among individuals, families, churches, and in the community, right? It's just not one localized little thing. Peacemakers are peacemakers wherever they go because it's an attitude of life, right? It's the personality that they develop, and it's just going to come out, right? Yeah, you're a peacemaker at home, you're going to be a peacemaker out in the community. And if you're not, you know what? There's going to be chaos everywhere. Christians who set out to be a thorn in someone's side are not doing God's will. They're not being peacemakers. Have you ever noticed that? I'm going to just be a thorn in this person's side. You're not being a peacemaker if that's what your intent is and what you're doing. See? That won't work because that's a wrong attitude to take toward being a child of God. So, all too often, then strife occurs. Peacemakers then labor to bring reconciliation between contending parties. What are they? Well, they're bridge builders, right? They use their influence, say, but they're bridge builders. And in the Latin, all right, coming from the Old French, a lot of the words for the priesthood comes from the words for bridge builders. To be a pontiff or to pontificate means to build a bridge between the two. Now, I don't know that there's so many in some of those religions that use those words that they're really building bridges anymore, but that's what we as priests of God, because that's what Christians are supposed to be, right? A holy priesthood. We're to be bridge builders. We're supposed to be bringing peace to people, standing in the gap, no matter the cost, to usher in peace. Peacemakers labor to bring reconciliation between contending parties. And too often we don't want to get involved, and it's understandable because sometimes you get between that rock and a hard place once again. Sometimes you become the lightning rod for the contending parties, but yet that's the attitude, that's the type of personality that a child of God should have, to try to bring people to peace. Now, great example from the Old Testament, Abraham, right? Abraham was a peacemaker. Where did he start? Well, it was right there within his own family, wasn't it? Now, you can see other places, peace with Pharaoh, peace with some of the people around him. Sometimes he compromised, didn't he? Remember, he got in trouble because he lied a couple times. Okay? He learned his lesson. I hope he learned, yeah, he did learn his lesson after the second time. I don't think he did it a third time. But especially here in Genesis chapter 13, verses 1 through 12, when he's dealing with his nephew Lot, okay? And there's contention because he's got a lot of herds and flocks, and Lot has a lot of herds and flocks, and it's not so much that he and Lot are contending, but the herdsmen of each are contending, and there's strife. So in order to bring peace, Abraham is willing to sacrifice something in order to remain in fellowship with his nephew. And what is he willing to sacrifice? Remember, they're down there because God had made a promise to Abraham. God didn't make a promise to Lot, did he? God didn't promise anything to Lot, did he? No, not at that time. Later on something happens, but no, it wasn't to Lot. So Abraham sacrificed some territory that he was entitled to Lot, and saying, hey, you choose. If you want to go to the east, I'll go to the west. If you want to go to the west, I'll go to the east. But you choose, and we'll kind of separate, but we'll still be friends. We'll still be brethren, right? But we'll get our herds and our herdsmen who are contending away from one another so that this doesn't cause us to be at war. Okay? No belligerence between us. So what did he not sacrifice? Okay? He did not sacrifice truth, principle, faith, or his nephew. What did he sacrifice? He sacrificed a part of that little property that he was entitled to. Was it still his? Well, yeah, it was still his, but he just let his nephew, hey, you go over there, and it'll be fine. In fact, when Lot is later taken by captives, remember that? The 5 kings from the east, was it? They come and they take people from Sodom and Gomorrah before those cities are destroyed. But they come, and Lot and his family are taken. Abraham gets up a small army and goes and rescues his nephew. You know why? Because that's what brethren do. That's what they do. And that's what peacemakers do. He's making peace for his nephew. So, as Christians, we are to be ministers of reconciliation and active participants in our ministry. And that's what 2 Corinthians 5:18 talks about. Paul says, we've been given a ministry of reconciliation. We're to be reconciling mankind to God. What did the devil do? The devil caused a war, a rebellion between man and God. Starting with Adam and Eve, and in this fallen world, that's what it is. It's rebellion. So, listen, as Christians, we're a part of that reconciliation ministry. We're trying to get people to come out of rebellion to God, to stop being belligerent to God, and be at peace with God. Isn't that a beautiful thing, to be at peace with God? True peace can only be found in a right relationship with Jesus Christ. We can't have a right relationship with God absent Jesus Christ, because that's what the Bible tells us. He is the one intermediary, okay, between God and mankind in general, and for each of us then individually. So if I'm right with Jesus, I'm right with God. And if you're right with Jesus, you're right with God, and we're right with one another. That's how that works. It's kind of like triangulation, right? But if one of us is not right with God, then we really can't be right with one another. There's going to be something askew, something missing there. So that's what we really strive for. Number one, see, that's our first priority, is a right relationship with God. Colossians 1:21 and 22, and you who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, talking about them as Gentiles in general, say, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. Think about that division between Jew and Gentile, okay? You can think of it in general terms, okay? But then you also have to look at it in specific terms. It not only was Jew and Gentile, it comes down to individual Jews, individual Gentiles. There had to be acceptance. There had to be acceptance of the individuals. Just as with us, as individuals become members of the Lord's church, there has to be an acceptance for true peace to reign. And with that acceptance, the one who becomes a Christian, there's going to be a growth period. Okay? So you have this ministry of reconciliation. But our number one priority, we have to be right with God first. Because if we're not right with God, nothing else is going to work. Second priority is bringing people to Christ for reconciliation. So once I'm right with God, I've got this great commission staring me in the face that I'm to go, as I go into the world, I'm supposed to be kind of a, how do I want to put it? Not so much that I've got to go out and teach, but I need to be an example. I need to be salt and light to a degree that there's an attractiveness there that other people might want to become Christians. Okay? So, bringing people to Christ for reconciliation. Mark 16:15, he said to them, go to all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. So we're going into the world every day, so we've got to take something with us, don't we? We're going to take our attitudes, we're going to take our faith with us, we're going to take our attitudes and actions with us on a day-to-day basis. So there's a priority there for us to make sure that we are presenting an appropriate example to people of what it means to be someone who is in a right relationship with God. All right. Third priority is to maintain fellowship with one another. And break it down just a little bit. Matthew chapter 5, verse 23 and 24. Okay. This is the burden, both of these are the burden on me as a disciple at the altar. And there remember that your brother has something against you. Leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled with your brother, then come and offer your gift. So if we haven't made an attempt to be reconciled with our brother, our worship isn't going to really be any good. God's not going to accept it. So what is it? There we have that responsibility that we've got to take the first step if we have done something wrong or if we have wronged our brother. But what if our brother's wronged us? Well, that's Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault. Tell him nicely. Tell him nicely. He ain't going to like it. But tell him nicely, because that's what you're supposed to do. Between you and him alone, if he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. If he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. So if your brother sins against you, you also have the responsibility to take the first step. If you sin against your brother, you got the responsibility to take the first step. If your brother sins against you, you got the responsibility to take the first step. I got the first responsibility either way, don't I? Yeah, ain't that something? But that's the way it is with peacemakers, right? So the fourth priority is to work to reconcile brethren who have gotten out of sorts. And Paul gives us an idea on this, Romans 14:19. So then let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. Mutual upbuilding. Not what's just good for me, Fred, but what's good for everybody in the group. Mutual upbuilding. And so, see, that's what happens when certain individuals think that they own a building, congregation, church. It's all about them. I reposted something on the internet that I saw. What was it? Your community on socialism, your hospital on socialism, your politicians on socialism. I looked at that mansion, your politicians on socialism, and I thought about a preacher down in Houston that has a house that looked like that. And I thought about, well, that's your religion on socialism sometimes too. Hey, send me your money so I can live in a $30 million mansion. Something's wrong with that picture there too, isn't it? Who's it about? Who's it about? It's about him, say. It's about him. Do you think he cares about those people other than what money they can send him, what money they'll spend buying his books, his wife's books, tapes, whatever? Probably not. So think about that and think about our role. Think about those priorities that God really gives to us as the church to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers. Now, you cannot reconcile brethren who do not want to be reconciled. They have to want to be reconciled. Now, first of all, they'd have to be reconciled to God, and most of the time they don't want to be reconciled to God. They just want their own way. All right? To be reconciled with God, they'd have to give up something. They'd have to give up their own way. And so that's not going to work. Listen to what Paul says, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3. For you are still in the flesh, for a while, and that means being ruled by the flesh. Okay? For while there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh and behaving only in a human way? If you read the book of 1 Corinthians, you've got to be ashamed of those brethren. They're still brethren. He still calls them brethren, but you've got to be ashamed of what they're doing and the way that they're acting. Do you think Paul was ashamed? You bet he was. But what was he doing? He was acting as a peacemaker, right? Because if he was just a peacekeeper, he would say, oh, well, that's what they're doing over there. It's none of my business. No. Didn't work that way. Romans 8:7, for the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot be. So, again, that first thing that has to be restored is a right relationship to God. Hey, I'm not talking about me here. I'm not talking about you got to do what I say. I'm talking about I have to do what God says. There's a problem there that I see. Okay? Now, use the interrogation model, right? Don't you see a problem there? They gonna see a problem? Well, if they have a good and honest heart, they might. Maybe not. So you got to really be careful. Okay. What's the peacemaker's satisfaction? Peacemaker finds great satisfaction in removing hostilities and effecting reconciliation between enemies. Isn't it great when people make up and they love one another? And it doesn't even have to be you. It's watching two people that you got back together. And that's something. We like to see it on TV, don't we? You know, how long did that go that there were, you know, they'd find family members that have been separated for 10, 20 years, and they bring them on TV, and, you know, people just love that, right? Well, yeah. Why? Because there's an emotional thing going on there, and we probably know people that we would want to be reconciled with ourselves. But there it is. There it is. Great joy. This is what James says. James chapter 5, verse 19 and 20. My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. That's got eternal consequences involved in it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Brothers and sisters, we're dealing with eternal things. Eternal things. That's why it's so important when we're talking about being a peacemaker, not just a peacekeeper. Jesus promised to bless the people who would become his agents for peace, saying that the peacemakers would be called sons of God. What a significant title, right? Sons of God. Because what's God trying to do? Bring peace. How did he do it? He gave up something, didn't he? What did he give up? His only begotten Son. Wow. So what am I willing to give up? Can't have my son. Either one of them. Can't have my daughter either. No. You're not getting them. You're not putting my kids on a cross. I'm sorry. I couldn't do that. How could God do that? He must love us so very deeply that he would let that happen. This means that every Christian, according to this Beatitude, is responsible for being a true peacemaker in his or her home, church, community, nation, and ultimately the world. But if we start off small, if we start off in this little bit of the world that we're in, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make the whole world a little bit better. A little piece of the world at a time. Amen? Smile, Lance. Smile, Lance. Come on. Come on. It's the end. Okay. Thank you so much for your time and attention. If you have a need this morning, let your request be made known as we stand to sing the